Do you have that public link?
Oh, we're doing that, huh?
Well, if we're on Hangouts.
We are live. Back in action.
Tag team back again. Oh, I just went 90s on you.
Yeah, that was pretty bad.
Just came out.
Air guitar. Good early 2000s.
My daughter in school is they started listening to 90s music. That's like what they listen to in music class.
Well, why
This
does
is an oldies class.
What is 90s music exactly?
She comes back. When she comes back,
Grunge.
she goes, "Can we listen to Ace of Base? Can you turn that on?"
Oh gosh!
Okay.
Wow. Nice.
No.
Pearl Jam.
Oh,
Ace
no.
of Base. Do
Don't
it.
turn around.
Everybody's broken.
I sold the sign.
Hey. Oh, you did. I started a live stream on YouTube. Wow,
Here
look
we
at that.
go.
It just tweeted for you.
Yeah, it tweets for me. It's all connected.
It's like okay, cool, awesome,
Yeah, it's
nice.
a thing. It's
All
a
right,
thing.
we're
Just
live.
like when I post the shows on the blog, it's tweets and Facebooks and all that other
Yeah,
stuff that I
hello,
don't ever
everybody.
do personally.
We got new lower third. Thank you,
Yes, we're
Google,
blue.
for
We're
fixing
blue.
that finally.
We are good back. We're
I'm not
back
sure.
with
If,
the lower
I'm not sure
third.
if anything else works, but we're gonna find out.
We have a viewer. That's you, Chris.
It's probably
isn't
it's always me.
it? That's you. Well, hi, Chris.
We have a fan. Hi, fan.
If it goes to
All right.
2, then we say hi, Aaron.
Right.
Or Russ.
So yeah.
All right. We ready?
Yes, let's do this.
Do this thing.
Yeah, we're ready.
20 seconds of airtime. Here we go. 3, 2, 1, go. Hello, and welcome to the Static Void Podcast. I'm Josh Chadwick,
I'm Todd Snyder.
And I'm Chris Gomez.
and we are your hosts. We're recording this on the evening of June 13th, 2017. In the last episode, or previously on the Static Void Podcast, we talked about all the stuff that's going to be coming in .NET Core 2.0, except we deliberately left out one crucial feature, Razor Pages. Razor
Pages.
So the reason we left it out is because, because all three of us have so much to say about it that we basically determined that it deserved its own show. So here we are, Razor Pages. Tonight we're going to be talking about Razor Pages. So since this is a brand new feature, though, it's likely that most people have not even heard of this thing yet. Like I actually, true story, I posted a question about Razor Pages to the ASP Insiders group, right? Like the group of folks that have been recognized as, basically ASP.NET fanboys and girls. And I got the newsletter equivalent of a blank stare. I actually got a couple of people writing me back saying, "Hey, it's just MVC, man. Like that's you just return a view from your controller and you got a Razor page, right?" And so I feel like we kind of have to set the level here and just say, okay, so this is a new feature, right? This is not just a Razor view. We're not talking about Razor views in MVC. We're talking about a new feature called Razor Pages. So, Chris, why don't you do us the honors of actually just laying this out for us? What is Razor Pages before we get into what we think about it?
Yeah, so Razor Pages is not MVC. It's not the MVC pattern. It's a page-based pattern built on top of the product called ASP.NET Core MVC. It's basically an implementation that combines the page controller and template patterns that are straight out of Martin Fowler's Patterns of Enterprise Architecture book. In Razor Pages, a URL is mapped directly to a file in your project, so a page, rather than a URL being mapped or routed to a controller in your project, some C# code, which then could theoretically do whatever it wanted, but quite often then goes off to display a view.
Right.
In this case, we're eliminating controllers, right? And you say index.cshtml, and now I go to your site, and index is mapped with a slash, just regular old, and it works.
Right. So I used to say default.aspx.
Yeah.
And I used to get the same thing.
Right.
Like, how is this not just web forms?
It's not web forms because web forms does more than just be a template for your HTML. In fact, I would argue that if we're all familiar with Razor views, which is when you write your HTML and then use some Razor markup to provide the dynamics of an MVC page, that a web form isn't that at all. A web form used specific ASP.NET Server controls that then magically rendered HTML out. The idea being you didn't even have to know HTML. You VB6 developers, come on and start building websites, because the thing you can do is you can place controls on pages. Another key aspect of web forms is it started a page life cycle and a postback cycle, so that clicking a button would fire an event as it posted back that you captured in an on-click, and then you did some stuff and maybe updated some other server controls, and then the page cycle, when it was generating the HTML for you, updated a grid or a post or a drop down or who knows what it did, and it went back.
And view state and all of that.
Yeah, and then there's view state under the covers. And MVC, ASP.NET MVC, whether we're talking .NET Framework or ASP.NET Core, has never tried to replicate that cycle or the server controls of the hidden HTML. You have to know HTML to build Razor views.
So, and I think that is, I mean, you can probably tell by the name, it is Razor Pages, which means it is using the Razor syntax, which is the same syntax that you've been used to using for I think it's been 10 years now since MVC. Actually, I think Razor was introduced in maybe MVC 2 or something. Probably about 2009 or so. Yeah. So yeah, almost 10 years, eight-ish years. So you've been used to using the Razor syntax in your MVC applications, and so now you're using that same exact syntax. There's nothing changed. There's some new things in there slightly. There's some new keywords that Razor Pages that are pages specific, Razor Pages specific. But other than that, it is just Razor.
Right, but to cut to the core, you could file a new project. You could create one Razor page, index.cshtml. You could put some HTML in there, and then drop into Razor syntax in there, and do some dynamic thing, and F5, you're ready to go. You're done.
So you missed one step. So file new empty web.NET Core project, and then add in your startup, add the lines, use MVC, right? And add MVC to the dependency injection framework in your services.
Right.
But so, and so you're adding MVC, you're adding the MVC framework to basically make this an MVC application. And along with that, at least in 2.0, comes the Razor Pages library. It also comes all of the MVC stuff. So if you were to add a controller and views, just like you're used to an MVC, that will also work all in the same project. So in that regard,
you can mix and match too, right?
Right. Yeah. Razor Pages is MVC, but it's not. Razor Pages is built on top of MVC.
Yeah. The worst thing about this is how MVC is the name of a product. It's also the name of a pattern.
Yeah, right.
Which it is not the MVC pattern per se. It's different pattern. It's a front control pattern. So
I get that ASP.NET wants to distance itself from the implementation of your site, the pattern you might use to implement either a web API, a server-side website, MVC, or using this web pages model. I get that. But it's almost unfortunate that MVC is a product name as well as a pattern.
Yeah.
So let me kind of jump in here real quick, because we kind of talked a little bit about, is this web forms, right? The elephant in the room. And it's certainly not web forms, but I think in many ways, when you look at the code, it feels like they're trying to make it easier to do things that web forms was kind of better at doing, right? I just want a simple contact form. I didn't want to have a bunch of files, different things. I just want something very simple. And when you look at this stuff, it feels like it's trying to do the same thing. So it actually feels more like the MVP pattern, particularly when we dive into the details of how you can do different things with Razor pages.
Model view presenter.
Model view presenter, yes. It is exactly how you would build a model view presenter pattern or implement it.
Right.
So
from a physical standpoint, it's one file.
Yeah, or you can have two files. You can have a
physical
presenter.
Mapping, right. And then yes, you could right. It's just that it's just a mapping though. Like when you think back to the early days of all this stuff, we would literally put a page in our web servers called index.html.
Yeah.
Or default.aspx. And this is sort of harkening back to that.
To a degree, right?
In some respects, sure.
The funny thing is the first time I looked at this stuff, I'm going, I don't use Razor anymore. I'm building single page apps. So
right, sure.
How relevant is this to me? So
I think we talked about that a little last time too, is that you could use ASP.NET Core MVC, the product, to just build JSON-based web APIs, and that is all you do in .NET land, and then go off and build a single page app using a framework.
So I could see a use case for this specific thing, having your index page as this Razor page, but that's the only real server-side HTML you're generating, or you may even have any server-side HTML. It's just an endpoint, just a way to get hooked into the system. And then you have your web APIs and other stuff that you normally do.
Would you consider saying like my pages that are 99% static, and I'll be a little generic here, the about page, the contact page, the index page, like I might use this for that, but when it's time to get into what is an application, I'm going to my SPA framework.
I think when you get to something that is static, the answer becomes a little bit clearer, right? It's like, it's very difficult to return. If I literally just added a .html file, literally a static HTML file to my site, which I don't want to do that because I want to take advantage of layout and stuff, which is going to have some dynamic
security or some other.
Yeah. So I'm not going to do that. But even if I could, it's still a little bit difficult to do that in the MVC, right? Unless I am literally pointing to that like hard-coded location of HTML, I still got to go through the create an action in my controller to return the contents of that HTML file if I want to control the URL or whatever, right? And so and generally I'm not even going to do that. I'm not going to create a static HTML literally. I'm going to create this CSHTML where maybe my actual page, my view, has effectively static content, meaning nothing dynamic, not really using Razor, but it's living inside of that more dynamic layout and that the rest of the site is. So and so we have plenty of those things, and I think that's the obvious place where this really fits in well, especially or assuming, which literally as I'm saying it now, I haven't actually tried this, but if I could mix and match and share that layout between my MVC views, my MVC, my model view controllers, right, the views that are returned from a controller action, and my Razor pages, that's pretty intriguing, right? It's a consistent experience, but the question comes, you start questioning that approach, or it becomes a little bit more gray the more and more logic that you add to those pages. So a good example is, okay, what about a read-only page? It is dynamic. The website for this podcast.
Yep.
Right. We have basically one page, which is the list, the summary of all of the shows, and then another page, 2 pages. It's literally the entire site, right? There's 2 pages because our contact stuff, our about us, is actually at the bottom of the first page. And so we have a list of the shows, and then you click on one of the shows, and then you get the show page, 2 pages. And it's completely read-only. There's nothing that you can submit. There's not a form post in that site.
Yeah, it's just content.
And it's just content, and it's simple content, right? It goes and pulls from a database and displays that content on a screen. And it's even cached to hell because it's that
Razor
simple, right?
pages feel like that's a good use case for Razor pages.
Right, but my point is that's not just logic. Like I'm doing some ifs and ands and some conditional stuff. I'm actually now going even the next step of integrating with something, calling a database, calling some service or some database, and pulling data and displaying it. But then you go to the next level and actually accept data, right? Let's say that our website had a contact us page with a form, that has your email address and just a box that you can type in content,
Comments or
type in your comments and send it to us. And the result of that is, I don't know, calls an email service.
Mhm.
Right? Very simple, straightforward. But again, another integration. This time we're actually accepting input from a user, presumably validating that input and adding more logic. I think all of these are the intended target for Razor Pages as a feature. Do you agree with that statement, that they're the intended target?
I kind of look at it as a programming model.
Intended, not that they're a good target or a good place, but the intended.
I look at these are two different programming models, right? You have the pure MVC pattern approach. You have well, I'm going to call it page controller because that to me is a better description of it. The page controller approach. They're just different options. You got to decide what makes sense. The question becomes is this Razor View approach or Razor Page approach, is this people going to start using this in an incorrect way? Or are they going to go down a path and all of a sudden, instead of then switching it to a pure controller, now they're kind of married to this and then they're kind of forcing stuff in they shouldn't.
Right. So you read the docs. There's right now, as of this recording, because this is like a brand new framework, there's literally one page in the docs.
Yep.
And I'm sure that is going to get blown out. Obviously, that has to. But right now, you go down to the comments in the docs, and the first handful of comments are literally, burn it with fire. Oh my God, this is awful. This is going to make people put their logic into view, and dogs and cats getting together, and everything is gonna go to hell, right? And so I have always made the statement that frameworks don't make bad code. They don't make developers write bad code, right? And in vice versa, you can take a framework that encourages a good pattern like MVC, like ASP.NET MVC, implementing the MVC pattern, and developers can still write really bad code in it, right? So you can have bad code in a great framework and good code in a bad framework, either way. My take on this is that I feel like this approach encourages you to put logic in the view. And basically, to my question earlier, is you have these kind of increasing levels of logic that just kind of sneak in. And like, well, what about this? Okay, well, I'm going to get it. Let's just assume it is okay for us to go and grab data from a database and render it. Let's assume that we all agree on that is fine. And let's go to the next step and just do that little simple contact form. But it's a simple contact form. And then we go to the next step. And now we start editing customers and clients. And then we go to the next step, right? And like, where do you stop? And where do you split that logic out? And it's just, it creeps up. And all of a sudden, you've dug yourself into a hole.
So here's the counter
argument. You got there.
MVC, ASP.NET MVC doesn't necessarily save you from doing that, right? A lot of people litter their controllers doing all that same stuff. They shouldn't necessarily be doing in a controller.
Right. The great majority of people, I think, use a controller as a page behind, a code behind page from web forms.
Yes. So yes, I do not disagree with that, but at least
that doesn't make it right. I'm just saying I think that's what people do. And I think we could go to any other platform. It doesn't even have to be ASP.NET or even Microsoft based. We could go look at what most people do in like Java Spring. And I'll bet you we're going to find the logic right there in the controller.
Yeah.
So we should probably talk a little bit about the approaches, right? Because there are two approaches to doing things. We have this @function stuff, which is basically I just start adding methods directly into my page, my Razor page. But then you also have the page model, right? Which can be a separate class.
It is. Right. It is a separate class.
It is okay. So it can be. I've seen some examples where they kind of were doing it inside the page too.
Yeah.
So
So
is the page model, even though it's incorrectly named, the same thing as a controller? It's a separate class.
Yes,
it is.
And so it gets better than web forms, right? That's the one-up on web forms. One of the biggest problems with web forms was that it inherently was very, very difficult to test, right? So you had to take patterns like the MVP pattern to create a completely separate presenter object that was testable, and that wasn't the view or the code behind that ASPX gave you. It was yet another class that you had to introduce, right? So you couldn't just use web forms out of the box, so to speak. You had to actually apply another pattern onto it, which is when I call ASP.NET MVC as one of the good frameworks that kind of encourages you in the right direction. It encourages you to put your logic in the controller and keep your views simple. To your point, I completely agree with you. Yes, you can put all of your application logic in the controller, which is a bad thing, but I'd rather it be there and testable than in a view or in a web forms code behind page that you can't just create a new instance of and start testing it.
So with the page model approach, we're kind of in between, right? Aren't we kind of getting the same thing as we would in a controller? It's a separate class from the view.
Right, and so that's the response. If you, in the docs and pretty much anywhere else that I've seen this too, that's the response is, well, if you have a lot of logic in your view, meaning in your Razor page, put it in the page model, put it in the quote code behind. I think they're actually calling it that. They meaning, I'm not sure Microsoft is referring to that, but that's kind of what the community
the docs
is already
kind of
referring
allude
to. Yeah, they're not afraid to call it code behind because it is code behind.
Yeah, it's kind of
It's
applying.
just it's not the web forms code behind file.
So the argument I have with all this
because
stuff,
you could
Jen.
theoretically create a testable page model in this project, in this framework. You could create a fairly unit testable page model, and it was really hard to unit test code behind.
Yes, and I did that. So the page, the Razor Pages base class that you have to derive from. Actually, I'm not sure if you have to, but that the docs say that you derive from. I've done that. You just create a new instance of it, and you start calling methods on it, and it works. I've validated that works. Of course, it does.
So the problem I have with all this, though, really is, so now we have kind of three different ways, right? We have the MVC way, right? Create a controller, do what I want to do, return my view, and then I'm off to the Razor page. Then with Razor Pages, I have two options. I can kind of use at functions and do whatever the hell I want in there, or now I can use page model. So the question now becomes is, why do I need three?
Oh, but it's all one framework. It's all .NET Core.
Well, it's all
MVC.
MVC, I think, is because see, .NET Core supports other frameworks, right? Like you could use Nancy.
Yes.
So
that's more
so this is
web
MVC.
API.
This is
It's
MVC.
It's all MVC, but
Although,
it's not, right?
I don't think it is. I don't. In fact, I really am not happy. As time goes by, I'm happy with the technical unification of MVC, Web API, blah, 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 from a technical standpoint. But from a product naming standpoint, this stinks.
Well, I think they should have dropped the MVC name. It just doesn't make sense. You don't call WPF WVM. It should just be called a product. Call it.
No, but even Razor Pages is so, Pages, you can't get a more generic name. Razor has already used, right? It is
right.
Engine. So
these are
you're looking at stuff.
The previous incarnation of this was Web Pages, which was so generic that I honestly believe, and I've tested this in audiences. I have asked, who here? Let's talk about ASP.NET. What are the frameworks for ASP.NET? Somebody might say web forms. Somebody might say MVC. Somebody might say web API. No one ever said web pages. Sure. And when you ask people, how many of you know that there is a fourth way, and it's all page constrained? You put your code right in the page. It feels very PHP like. How many people know about that? Nobody. Nobody knows.
That's because it was yet another framework. So if they had done what they did with Razor Pages, and just by saying use MVC, or AKA just the default template, and it was just there, and you could start using it, more popular.
Yeah. So do you think that the fact that this has all been stuffed in the MVC meta package, and I think I'm correct in using that terminology that way, is a marketing attempt to say maybe people will explore it because you don't have to do anything. You just go add new page.
The selling point of this is simplicity. I want to say ease of use. I guess ease of use and simplicity, roughly the same thing. But the moment that you have to go and you say file new project, new empty web project, and then else, it gets to be a little less easy to use. Yeah. So yes, I do agree with that. And I do kind of like the fact that MVC is ready to go when you need it in an MVC application. But let's step back for a little bit, because this is not MVC, right? No, Razor Pages is built on top of MVC. It leverages a lot of the
concepts,
classes.
Right? It leverages cross-cutting concerns, right? Like routing.
No, when you get it, if you go and look in the source, so I went in the GitHub repo and I read basically almost all of the source code for Razor Pages over the past couple of days, right? And so what you see, they're calling out, they have very thin wrappers to things like model binding, right? So they're not reinventing model binding. It is literally the same model binding, but what they're doing is they're adding a wrapper on top of it that calls the model binding. That wrapper, though it has very little logic, still has a little bit of logic. It's not literally the same. So you might be calling me on semantics there. Okay, that's fine.
Sure.
It's often those little changes, those little things are often where those little bugs come into play in production, right? Especially with a framework like these things. But the bigger thing that is quite literally, at least as of this recording, and mind you, we're in preview, right? We're in preview 2, I think soon to be preview 3 coming up. So this has not come out yet. It's not released yet.
Yeah, not fully
baked. I actually submitted an issue on the GitHub site for this. The authorization, the way that you lock pages down, you authorize pages, is different, completely reinvented. It's new. It's completely different. It's completely separate from the way that you authorize a controller or an action in MVC. It's a new set of logic. Now, to your point, Chris, yes, it comes down to routing. It's the same. It's built on top of the same routing, right? And on the bottom of it, it ends up creating and adding to literally the same group of routing rules, right? So when you say route my MVC page or route my Razor pages and route my MVC controllers, that's all in one big collection of routes. That is all one site and it's all together. It's literally one thing. But the API to do it as of now, completely new API. You got to learn it and you got to understand it. And what's worse, it's actually URL based. It's string based.
Yeah.
You would expect, as an MVC developer for years now, I expect to go to my quote controller, whether it's a page controller or not. I expect to go to that page. I expect to go to that controller and be able to see not only a route, but also something like an authorized attribute. Right? I mean, that's what I'm expecting to do, and that's what I tried, and it just didn't work. And so, if we're going to claim to be one framework, then it really has to be these same conventions and these same approaches everywhere. And so, like, I'm going to get off my soapbox now because I'm sure I have all the confidence in the world that by the time it is released, you'll be able to throw that attribute, that authorized attribute on there. And this is just
are you sure? Because I thought they kind of felt like they were done. Except for bug squashing.
No, they're not. They're actively working on it. I mean, they've got
but you get to a stage. You get to a stage where you're going to release .NET Core, ASP.NET Core 2, and you say, "This is the code is locked down. We're bug fixing now."
So
clear if they're at
what
that
I'm
stage.
what I'm relatively sure that this API that I'm talking about, which specifically is in your startup. In your startup code, when you're configuring Razor Pages, you have an options object and you say authorize folder and you give it a string path to your folder, or authorize page and you give it a string path to your page. So that's the API. Also the anonymous, allow anonymous for both of those, folder and page.
Yeah.
That's the API. That will make it to release, I expect. I don't know why they would just pull that out now.
You just want some Razor looking attributes. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying if they're saying this is one framework and it's just MVC,
right,
then the way that we've been authorizing controller actions for the past 10 years is by throwing an authorized attribute on the controller, right? And so since the page model is effectively a controller, at least it looks a whole hell of a lot like it, and it is the page controller pattern, why can't I still do that? I really
and let's be honest, if the simplicity of this is that by choice, Todd talked about how you can pull functions out into a page model, but you can also make the choice of saying everything's going into the CS/HTML file. If that's what we're trying to accomplish, then you should also be able to throw the authorized attribute on there. Yes,
right.
There's no way to do that on a folder. Yeah. You couldn't do it, but you could still say index is for everyone, contact is for everyone, admin is for admins. Like, why can't if the page is going to have all this knowledge because you've decided to centralize knowledge, then centralize the knowledge.
Yep.
Yep. Once you start breaking the knowledge apart, decoupling it, as enterprise developers, gosh, can't believe I just used that term. Like we get the value of it. We get the value of decoupling services, and because that way we've all run into the problem of like, oh God, it's now brittle because everything's mushed together. But if this framework is saying some projects, maybe small number of developers, small footprint of what you're trying to do, just you know what, you don't need all the baggage, index.cs.html, then it should all be centralized. Either do it one way or the other.
So let's expand a bit on this. And Jess, since you're a little more familiar, you can help me out here. So if you look at the example, it doesn't look like they're using model binding directly. In their example here, they're doing the contact form. They have a new attribute called bind property.
So okay. So let's get to that specific. There's the short answer to your question, or where you're going is no. Like I said earlier, they are literally using the same model binding logic, the same model binding service, class, whatever. The model binder in MVC.
I used to go to my controller and say like, okay, I want a model bind. I'm going to put my object right here in my method.
Right.
This feels different.
Eventually, it feels different. Eventually, it does come down to literally the same exact model binding that is MVC. Except now, for some reason, they've added this new property, bind property, or this new attribute, bind property, right? And now it's another thing to learn. It's cognitive overhead. It is its own framework that now it's not just one framework anymore. It's one framework plus some more stuff that I have to learn. That aside, again, call me semantic, call me nitpicky, right? But like I'm picking on every little thing because it's not the same framework. It's plus some more, and that's the problem.
It feels like they're adding overhead.
Yes, it's overhead. So you put bind property on there. When you do that, it works exactly as you'd expect.
So
I will say that.
Are you saying that if it was going to be like MVC, that contact should have been in the on post to sync parameter list?
Yeah.
Right. And it makes you wonder what happened. Why couldn't they have done, like, I don't feel like that bind property stuff came to be because they said, yeah, let's do something different. I could be wrong. We don't have,
so if you look at their example,
but I feel like that feels like time. Like we ran out of time. We're stuck. So
I think it's more about making it more declarative. Because if you look at their example here, in their actual HTML piece, they're binding to this. They're using ASP.NET 4 on input tags.
So the listeners can't look at our example
right
here. So
yeah, sorry.
I mean, basically, we always swear that we're not going to talk code on this, but we have in your Razor page. Todd, you mentioned you can either do this in the page or you can actually create a new class that is a page model. So think of a class, right? And that class has properties. Those properties can be string, whatever type, right?
Yeah.
String, even complex properties, because it's
complex.
using the MVC model binding. And then one of the features of Razor pages, which we haven't even gotten into yet, is the concept called handlers. So a page, like the web API concept, a single endpoint, a page can actually respond to different HTTP verbs differently, right? It can respond to a get, put, post, delete.
Handle X, handle Y.
Right, and it does that through a convention of you just create a method called, it starts with on, the word on, right?
Right.
And then on get, on post. I assume on delete, on, I don't know. I didn't look to see if it supports them. I assume it does. So there's that, right? And so in those methods, that's where you can put your logic when those things happen. So you can create that contact page, both the page that you see to present the form and the page that you use to process the form are literally the same page model, just different methods in that model. You got the on get, or just nothing, it just renders the basic page, and then the on post to handle the post. So what you said, Chris, earlier is that if this were an MVC controller, that on post would have a property that is the posted data, right?
Right.
So that's one way. That's cool. What Razor Pages offers is in that class, that page model class, you can define a property, a string property, a Boolean property, a whatever type property, including complex types, and use the attribute bind property on top of that thing to tell Razor Pages when this is posted back, or even on a get, go and populate these things using the normal model binding stuff from the URL, from the query. Yes. Yes. So
on the fly
basically,
model, because
the
even if
page
you look
model
at this
is your
code,
model.
there is no class. At least that's an option.
So there's always a class. I mean, so that's what Razor is.
Implicitly generated, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
You
Razor.
as the developer, you're not seeing the class, but yeah, I agree with you. There's an implicitly generated class, an implicitly generated model. Whereas
So there's either way. You can.
yeah.
So what you're saying, Chris, you're referring to the fact that you can actually do this in the page, in
Yes,
the
right.
.cshtml.
Right. Yep.
What Todd is talking about, and what I was just talking about, is that you can actually you could separate that out. You can have a
class.
.cs file, which has a class that derives from the class page model.
Right.
Literally, that is the name of the base class, page model, and
One's
that offers
declarative,
you do it either way. It's literally the same whether you do it in the page or creating a separate class. You can do everything I just described and what you were describing.
Yeah, but I think the point of our argument is we had one way of doing it with MVC, and now we kind of have this new way of doing it with.
Now there's another way. Yeah, I mean the equivalent to this would be in your controller, in your MVC controller, rather than accepting, to your point, Chris, rather than accepting an argument to that method, to that action, you would put a property on your controller class and bind that to the request, and you would go and refer to that when you had a request to an action, when you're processing an action, right? Which is just kind of weird, but it makes much more sense when the page model is directly connected to the view. Like this is the only view you'll ever use, and
more
so
tightly coupled.
It's more tightly coupled. That sounds like a bad term, but in this case, I don't know. It's
intended.
It's intended. Yeah. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's intended.
Yeah, I mean the reason they have to do that bind property is because if you just threw the type into on post as if you were an MVC, the code can't even compile yet. So you can't even reflect over it to figure out what you want to put into this implicitly created model. That's got to be how this happened.
Yeah, it feels more syntactic sugar way of getting things to work, which is fine. It's just more about that now I have another way. And I think
I mean, I will admit that when I look at Razor Pages, I understand that you can create a page model as a separate file, but I have tended to focus very heavily on this all-in-one model because I really feel like that's part of the target here. I guess I could be wrong. Maybe it's a stepping stone as you start by putting it all in one page and then you say, oh man, I should really pull this out. So let me ask this question. This starts to head towards the who is this for. Is it for people who would even be thinking about a unit testable model in the first place? Like, is that even in their vocabulary? And I'm not trying to dumb this thing down because that's what it sounds like, right? But what I'm saying is, if you're going to go with this, they're trying to provide a way to do a little decoupling with the page model class code behind type methodology. But there's also this put it all in one. And who is that serving? What?
Let me put that
for.
Let me put that back at you. Let me rephrase that question back to you. At what point, in what scenario, who would you be recommending this approach to? If they came to you and said, I have X scenario, your response would be, sounds like Razor Pages is a great fit. And
this is, I think, was the problem with web pages, is when you talked to the real world experts, and it's not about tooting a horn or anything. Somebody comes to one of us or someone in any organization. Oh, you know this ASP.NET stuff? Hey, what should I use web pages for? And you'll be guided to MVC.
That's not the question I'm asking. The question is not
what's the scenario.
How can I use how can I use this new technology, this new bell and whistle that I just heard of, right? That's not the question. It is the inverse of that. It is somebody's coming to you with a problem, and your solution is Razor Pages. What is that problem?
I guess we're going to go back to the things that people always point out, right? Smaller websites that are maybe just some forms over data, CRUD. there's a contact form and there's a sign up button,
Yeah.
and that's about all we do here.
I mean,
very formed over data type thing. Because I actually have two use cases I think this falls into. One is I am a single page app and I just need a very simple, give me my first page out the door.
well, that's
having
static.
controllers, nothing but a
Just use
Why
password.
can't you just do that with an HTML file?
You can, but there are certain times you need certain things. Like maybe you need security or some other user type things where there are times you may not want to just have a simple HTML page.
But now, doesn't your SPA framework of choice already offer you that? And now what always bugs me, and this is a little soapboxy about something not related to this episode, is typically when people say, hey, we're going to use ASP.NET MVC and we're going to use Angular, is now you got to marry the two things.
Right.
And unless you're
frankly,
brilliant, like Steve Sanderson with his JavaScript services, which is the first time I've seen somebody possibly get this right. I'm serious. Is that I look at what he's done and going, that actually might work. Because in the past, when I've seen people try to marry it up on their own, there's leakage everywhere. You're either using the MVC authorized stuff or you're using the Angular stuff, and it never really marries right. And
right. I mean, frankly, I'd like to stay away from the SPA conversation altogether, because then it's, why do you need server-side rendering? Forget about Razor Pages.
Right,
I mean, I've been asking that question about ASP.NET MVC for years now.
If you've taken on ASP.NET Core, Microsoft has clearly said you have chosen, you need a server-side framework.
Right.
You've decided you want a server-side framework.
Yes, but that doesn't mean you need it for your views. It means you just want a framework to handle request. That's the ultimate idea of a web framework server-side, is to handle request.
A web API.
Yeah.
I know. That's all I'm using ASP.NET Core for is web APIs. So,
Yeah.
So
right.
again, we want to get off track. There are plenty of.
So who wants to use Razor Pages, and when do you use it?
Yeah. The other thing
Right.
that comes to mind is content sites, right? If I'm building a content site, WordPress is an example, right? And the equivalent for WordPress in the .NET world is Orchard. It was always very clumsy to add your own controllers to make it work. Especially when all you really do is you just want to put content on the screen. So this is the only place I feel like I would really use it.
So is it basically you're saying my site lists all of my favorite movies and they're in a database.
Yeah,
So
it's like
instead of me
e-commerce
spinning up controllers and spinning up models, why can't I just make the call, get the data, render it out?
And
be
maybe
done
I
with it?
still do have web API controllers that handle AJAX requests and stuff, but I want to get I want some of the advantages of what I can get with a Razor page.
Yeah. It also could just be that you like the page-based model. You like the idea of this file represents a URL instead of, and it's funny because MVC doesn't technically give you this, but it kind of does, because by convention, you
kind of
just
fall
by
into it.
naming a controller and putting it in a certain folder, you get routing for free.
Yeah.
So we were already getting that because that was a choice made in MVC to be convention-based. And so you're not getting much of an advantage, although you could theoretically pick up a CS/HTML file and say, boy, I really wish this was a different routing path. Just pick it up and go put it in another folder and you're done.
No. You can, even in Razor Pages, out of the box, you can define your route patterns exactly the way that you do with MVC.
But let's say you just bought into the file-based stuff. You just buy into it hook, line, and sinker.
Sure. The default
don't
is
even
to
care
follow
about
the
any of that.
folder structure. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I agree with you, Jess. It's hard to figure out what project it's for, and that's probably why both it and I think its predecessor get met with a lot of blank stares. You start imagining what we all imagine is the internal project that becomes mission critical, and now you're stuck with this tightly coupled,
spaghetti code
project.
Leaky abstraction. So let me ask a different question, right? What is one of the key tenets of Core? It runs across platforms.
Mm-hmm.
So what if really the audience for this is the PHP developer? Because this is their model.
I think that's it. I think you nailed it.
I think it is definitely a big piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, PHP is easy. That's
it's page, right? Yeah, personal page.
Yeah.
You both know how many times that there's been flat denials that this is not meant to be a PHP.
A little bit of WordPress development I've done with PHP, I wanted to shoot myself and this is so
right.
hard.
I mean, we get back to why did Microsoft invest so much time in this? Why do they think it's a good idea? I think even though it's not a product in the classic sense of they're going to be making money off of it, I think they needed a competitor to PHP. I mean, people are picking PHP for ease. I mean, isn't PHP the most popular web framework now? Isn't that?
Yes.
I don't know what I'm quoting.
Well,
but
I think
feel like
per site,
been a
it's like
number of
WordPress, which is
places.
PHP. So,
Well,
but no,
yeah,
PHP
right.
is predominantly the biggest amount of websites run on PHP.
That's a good. Yeah, is PHP the most popular framework, or is WordPress?
Well,
the
let's ask you this: if and I hate to say that it's actually the case now, if you're old enough to remember classic ASP,
Mm-hmm. It feels a little bit like it.
and people loved classic ASP. Built the page the way you built it static, and then put in a little bit of dynamic here, a little bit of dynamic there, a little bit of code here, loop over some elements there, and I got a website.
Right. So if we had some people from the ASP.NET team on right now, they'd be freaking out right now. Right?
Sure.
Like that is the last. Like the PHP thing was bad enough, but now classic ASP, no way, right? So why? I mean, speaking on their behalf, because they're not here to defend themselves.
No, we're not speaking on their behalf, though. I think that's the key point. I think the value of this conversation is us asking the question, because not that it's our job to go forth and evangelize. I want to make that very clear. It's that I think the key is the experts in the real world can help by saying, okay, you've built this, and I just don't know what I'm going to use it for.
No. So I'm saying I'm just joking that they're not being defended here, but that's true. It's our job to defend them. But in that particular case, I mean, there are plenty of issues with classic ASP, right? I mean, it was very kind of scripty and top to bottom, much like PHP, right? Where this is more of a class-based model. Even if you don't go with the page base model and the code behind, right, and separate it out, even if you do just have everything in the view, there's a lot more structure to it, and there's a lot more conventions that help you out by that get on, post, and everything. It helps you structure your code a lot better. You're using C# and you're using ASP.NET Core, which is just a better framework. And then you also have all the benefits of routing and everything, right? So I think that even though it may feel like that's not necessarily an illegitimate comparison to compare it to classic ASP. I think that it is.
It wasn't.
I'm not.
It's more structured for one thing.
I don't mean to be defending Razor Pages, right? I don't think Razor Pages.
It's more structured than classic ASP, right?
Yeah,
it's not little snippets of code. These are real completed functions.
Yes.
Except for the Razor syntax, where you could loop.
You could.
Those are snippets of code.
Write classic ASP in Razor Pages. You could do that, but it really doesn't encourage you to do that. So
okay.
I think for me, I basically agree with you, Chris. I mean with you, Todd, in regards to what is the target scenario? Who is this for? I already said it, right? Our site is only effectively 2 pages. And it happened to be an ASP.NET Core site just because I just wanted to use ASP.NET Core and specifically MVC, right? And so I have a controller. Our website for the podcast is 1 controller, 2 actions. And the 1 action just returns view. Actually, they both go and make a database call, but they could just return view. Like, they are almost that simple. And regardless of our site, the podcast site, I've made in pretty much every single MVC application I've made, there's a handful of them. A decent percentage of my actions are just a single line return view.
Right.
And normally on the home controller, because why not, right? And then I give them a route. And that's a smell right there, like the home controller becomes a dumping ground for everything that just needs to return a simple view.
Could you make the argument, though, that it was just as simple for you to build that site? It wasn't like you said, oh my God, I slaved over the complexity for my simple site. You didn't. You went simple.
I didn't. Right. If the choice of why would I use Razor Pages over MVC specifically, I don't have an answer for that, right? So I did our website.
So let me approach it from a different direction, because I think you guys know this, and I want to try and get it on the record in this time. Is, would you be comfortable saying, okay, you're a junior dev, try Razor Pages because it's simpler? Is that even a statement? Is that, or do you believe no, it's not simpler?
In what context? In what scenario? Because ultimately, so if we're talking about our podcast website, where I am going to be the only maintainer, maybe you guys might edit it at some point, but like at most, the three of us are the only people that in the world that will ever touch this thing, and it'll never get more complex than the 2 actions it is. Maybe we'll add another action, right?
Sure, right.
So it's never going to be complex. Yeah, sure, that's an obvious case. But when you're talking about a junior developer, presumably you're talking about now a job role, and you're talking about someone on a team in a company, and this thing is going to fulfill a business function. It's going to live forever, and there's going to have capabilities that are going to be added onto it, and eventually it's going to snowball and become unmaintainable. I meant that to be more of a question than a statement.
So you're right.
That's my fear, right?
Okay. All right, so it's not to say choose Razor Pages because I think it will be more approachable for you than MVC. We got to imagine the person who doesn't know both. I don't know if this is a mythical person though, because all 3 of us already know MVC.
I question the fundamental argument that MVC is difficult to learn, right?
With the convention-based approach, you were able to build that site super quick. Probably only after reading the first 2 chapters of a book on MVC.
Yeah,
you don't have to read that much to have built the Static Void podcast website. You don't have to finish the book.
Right. So I think more concepts, but only a couple more. You know,
I think we're looking at it wrong.
So then let me turn around and go one other direction. Is I have made the argument that there's no gateway drug for C#. I think one of the problems .NET has is imagine you're a young kid. You're anywhere from 14 to 20. And you're just doing stuff that's cool, because you think it's fun. And so, what are the kind of gateway things out there? Well, you might learn JavaScript just because, man, that's going to get me on the web. I can do my server side, I can do my client side. Maybe you'll even do some stuff with physical hardware in JavaScript, or maybe that's what makes you decide to do Arduino, because that's cool. I'll get to control that robot. I kind of submit that I'm not sure what the gateway entry is to get people excited about .NET these days, other than that, well, I can go get a job. And one of them that I've identified is Unity, the Unity game engine, which by default, every Unity tutorial in the world is going to be like, okay, let's start doing some scripting of our game objects, and we're going to use a language called C#. So by some miracle, a product that Microsoft didn't build, didn't create, didn't pay for, chose Mono and C# to be the premier scripting language. So my contention has always been you've got some young kids killing themselves to learn C# so that they can write Unity games. Was there an opportunity for the ASP.NET team to say, we've got something simple for you to build your first web page too? And I've been pushing this for a long time. Unfortunately, I don't feel like I've got the design in my head, and I have to admit that I'm not 100% sure this is it.
So I think you can achieve it with this. But my argument would be is if you're just building a page, right? It's just a simple page, would you static? Why not just build HTML? Why not use a content engine? Why would you use C# for?
Because I learned it when I was working on Unity, so I kind of get some of this. It's
let me
really,
interject the thing. If I'm going to talk to a database, now I need to go figure out how to get to the database.
Yeah, right. And it's a different API.
Not a low-hanging fruit.
That would happen with if Unity used JavaScript, you'd have to go learn something anyway. Maybe you'd have to learn or something.
I argue your argument is not correct. That if Unity is such a specific problem domain space, the minute you want to build an application that's more than Hello World,
right?
You're going to need to how to get to a database.
I'm just saying, I don't know what these entry points are for developers anymore. Like what drive, and this is probably another show. In fact, I know it's another show. What drives someone today to join this stack? Because unfortunately, the 3 of us aren't good examples.
No.
You've got decades of experience. The choice was made for different reasons. The world was different in, a couple decades ago. Yes. So, we're the wrong people to ask that question to. And and I kind of have always pushed the idea of a Razor Pages. Like I've always encouraged it whenever I've been asked. Yeah, I think you should do something simple, because I feel like we need a way to say to people, look how easy it is to get started with .NET. You can build a website. It's on the web. Awesome. Aren't you excited now? And I don't feel like we have that in the .NET space.
I definitely don't think Razor Pages, other than the very most simplest thing, I just want to do a quick hello world thing. I think it's just as complicated.
It seems to get complicated quickly.
What is just as complicated?
Razor Pages.
If you want to do
as,
anything beyond
as learning MVC, like it's not going to come naturally to you. Yes, you use the templating. You build some HTML and a little bit of dynamic templating with Razor in there, sure. But the moment you want to do anything a little bit more, like read from a database,
yep, exactly.
You're not that far away from just of learning MVC anyway.
Yep. By the time you've learned about those binding properties and you've learned about the convention of on get, on post, and all of that stuff, you've learned how to inject your service, or even just import the namespaces that you need to make your direct SQL call, if that's what you want to do. Forget about a repository or anything like that, right? Even if you're just making straight SQL calls right from your view, which it pains me to even say that,
Well, it looks like you got to learn EF Core, right? Because you're going to build an application, a DB context of some kind.
Well, I'm trying to keep it simple, right? Because you can. And
this is in the intro to Razor Pages doc. They're already dropping into EF Core.
Right. So, but I'm not even going there, right? You can make a SQL command and execute a SQL command against the database directly from your view, which now we're definitely getting into classic ASP territory there. But in regards to concept count, we already had to learn about binding properties. We had to learn about this convention for the methods. We had to learn about the .NET APIs for reading a database, which is all stuff we can copy and paste, sure. But it's all stuff that we need to know about and learn about and find.
And guess what else you need to learn about? Async.
And you don't need to.
It's right here.
You don't need
every one of their examples. They use it.
You don't need,
and it's probably the right thing to do.
You don't need to, though. First of all,
you're right. You don't.
And second of all, async is now as simple as the async and await keywords, right? There's no. That's simple.
That's a whole other debate.
That's another show, right? Is async await not as simple as it seems, right?
Or how do you kill scalability real quick? Use it too often.
So, in terms of concept count, we can compare it to some other stuff, some other non-Microsoft stuff. So there's PHP, really easy to get into. If you want to go ahead and make a database call directly from your PHP page, go for it. It's just like ASP Classic, right?
Yeah, you just need to find the right gem or whatever the hell they call their things.
Exactly. But then, so Node, compare it to Node, the other really popular one, right? I have spent dozens of hours, hundreds of hours learning how to do things in Node, like simple things. Return a static HTML page, So like we're comparing it to stuff.
It's not straightforward.
Yeah, when we're comparing it to stuff that the cool kids are using and learning today, these new devs, these newbies, right? Using JavaScript and all that fancy stuff, like the concept count there is not low either. And frankly, I would say, taking aside C#, I would say the concept count of the MVC library and getting started in ASP.NET MVC, it's probably lower than Node, especially with all the templates and everything that Microsoft provides, right?
Yeah, and it's more prescriptive, right? Microsoft gives you X way to do something. Here, you can out of the box, you get everything to get to a database and back and forth.
Yeah. Between Microsoft Docs, they're great templates, and Visual Studio, which is the best IDE ever. Then you learn a little bit of C# and you're good to go when you're comparing it to things like Node, right? So you're building on top of a cross-platform library, right? ASP.NET Core. And there you go. So now if I need to run my applications on Linux, and that's why I'm going to Node, well, now I can run my ASP.NET Core apps on Linux too. And the concept count's low, and I get access to C#, which is the best language ever. I can do it in Visual Studio Code. I can use it in Visual Studio Mac. I don't want to sound like a marketing. I'm just saying.
Time out here. I thought TypeScript was the best language ever.
I got what you're saying. You're saying, here's what you're saying. You're saying, we have MVC, so get off my lawn and don't invent any new frameworks. No, I'm teasing you. But that maybe there's no additional value that's making you want to switch over. Like, Nancy's pretty popular among the cool kids. And the reason why is they say ceremony. Lots of ceremony goes away. And if there was a way to design this so there was a lot less ceremony, then maybe, because like you said, you see a lot of the idioms here. If model state dot is valid. Well, yeah, I'm doing that in MVC already. So if there was some way, and I'm not pretending that I'm literally what I'm asking you for is what I'm asking for is magical. I get it. I totally get it.
It's called WordPress. Move on.
But it's the idea that you stay in C# and you reduce your work, you reduce the ceremony, you reduce, I'm not even sure I want to see async task in there because now that's a concept. What the heck is this? What is this? I don't know. If I'm totally brand new to this space. So despite the negativity vibe that you might get listening to the show, I'm rooting for something. I have for a long time been rooting for something that just reduces ceremony, and you just get to work. And maybe there's a reason why that didn't end up surviving.
I have
right?
noticed
Maybe that's
and been frustrated by, on principle, the fact that I have to put all of this crap in just to return a view, right? I have to create a controller and I have to create an action, and that action has one line that says return view, and then I have to go and create my Razor page in MVC. This annoys the hell out of me, but the crux here, and I'm calling back to what I said earlier, this is nothing new, but this is the bottom line for me. Maintainability, right? So when we are talking about building applications, not our stupid podcast site, not that our podcast site is stupid, it's great, but the logic in it is simple and stupid logic, right? Versus, I'm talking, real world applications that we're doing at work and we're going to be maintaining for a while. I have to worry about maintaining them. This approach encourages me to put stuff in the view. The framework, Razor pages, right? Razor is a view syntax. And so it encourages you to put stuff in the view. Even if the response is, well, just create a class and put it in the code behind. Yes, that's fine. That's a legitimate answer. But that's not what the framework encourages you to do. This, quote, simplicity encourages you to put logic in the view, and so that's what people are going to do. So, you guys made the point earlier compared to MVC, right? You guys made the point earlier that, yes, you could put a lot of crap in the controller as well, but it encourages you out of the box by default to do separation of concerns, to maintain that separation of concerns. Just put your view logic in the view, and keep your markup simple in the view, keep your logic in the controller, and then you get into the debate of, well, what's logic in the controller? How much logic and blah 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 blah. But that's a good place. That's a better place. If I have logic in my controller versus logic in a page somewhere, that is a better place, and it encourages it. So it leads me in that direction. And that is
the question. Let me counter your
default.
Here.
Yeah, go ahead.
If this model always forced you to create a separate class called page model, then you'd have that same point. You'd have that same thing, a separate thing that you could do whatever you want into it. That's separate than the Razor view.
How is that? That's not.
And you can even inject services. You can inject services into it, right? You can add transient services using the ASP.NET Core configure services function. That's right, isn't it? And then those would be injected into your page model constructor the same exact way, wouldn't they? I mean, I think that's all true. So, I mean, would we be happier? Would we be happier if the example that they gave for Razor pages went with the page model approach, injecting services in instead of saying, yeah, just throw all the logic into your page model? They were like, no. Decouple that into interface-based services, and inject those.
That's not what they're doing. That is not.
No, I know that's not what they're doing in the example, but you can do this with Razor pages, right?
You can.
So would you be happier? Would you be happier if the example went that way, and then at the bottom said, haven't eaten for a while, you want a Snickers? Here's the way to mush it all together.
Yes. Yes, I would be happy, but that's not the selling point of the framework. The selling point of the framework is simplicity, and you don't need that code behind file.
Yeah. Well, again,
Well, what if the selling point of it is page-based, well, page controller versus model view controller? What if that's the selling point?
then it's kind of redundant because you already have it today. They didn't need to invent a new framework for that.
Right.
So here's a different question, and this is something, and Jess, you may know this or not. So in a standard CHTML page, right, I can change the code in that page to a point without recompiling my DLL. So if I have at functions, can I start making modifications, and will I just get just-in-time compilation?
Yes. Yes, you have pre-compilation, so you have the ability or the option at compile time to compile everything into an assembly and ship just the assembly and not the views, so your views don't ever go to the server. But
Okay.
the default behavior is to ship the views on the server, and if you go and change that, then they're just text and they are just in time compiled. They're JITted, yeah. And so when you hit them for the first time, they get compiled into that. And so if you change them, then they get compiled on the next hit. Yeah.
So again, it's kind of mixing pros and cons here. That is to me is the only advantage you get in this case.
I consider that an awful thing to do.
Again, but this is where content sites come in, right? A content site, the idea of like WordPress again, I may create a new page and I need to upload it into the WordPress database. This kind of model fits better into that scenario than having a class I have to compile now deploy a DLL. So again, it comes down to the use case.
Well, let's do this. In the show notes, we can add some blog posts that we found. People are making pitches. At the same time, I've got some blog posts here that
Totally.
they make the pitch and then they come to the end and they say, yeah, I'm still not sure what the use case is. So, there's confusion, I think, in the community for what is the clear-cut use case. You tried to get it out of us today, Jess, and we sat silent for how long? Couple videos, and I don't know. I mean, that's there's a lot of that. There's a lot of I don't know going on, right? What's the clear-cut use case where you say, yes, I'm choosing Razor Pages? And I don't know if the answer is just, well, use what makes you happy. Is that the answer? Is that a good answer? I don't know.
What makes you happy until you dug yourself into a hole and now you can't maintain it anymore.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem. The other problem is if Microsoft is pushing it so much, people are going to start using it thinking, oh, this is the right way to do it, without necessarily understanding the pros and cons.
Are they pushing it? I've seen one video at Build.
It's the new thing, right? I mean,
the audience response was lukewarm. Look, ASP.NET Web Pages was the new thing, and nobody even knew it existed.
True.
I'm not sure there's a bunch of mindshare penetration going on unless.
No, I doubt most people will look at this and go, "I'll just create a controller and be done with it."
I'm wondering how many people have ever even heard of it, because it would take the MVPs, the bloggers, the speakers, to start showing up at code camps and conferences saying, okay, well, let's look at my project. And people will be like, whoa, what are you doing? Oh, this is Razor Pages. And if that's not happening, then people aren't going to know about it.
I think the more realistic is they go and they make that presentation and everybody goes, whoa, what are you doing?
Well, I mean, there was a build, right? Talk on this?
There was a build talk that took about 15 minutes or so, 20 minutes. And we'll make sure we link it. It's the Intro to .NET Core 2 talk with Scott Hanselman and Daniel Roth, and they did pretty thoroughly go through it. It was recently discussed in ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. It's been getting traction if you're super, super duper plugged in, but how many developers aren't? And they're never going to even know what it is.
That's the problem, is people who potentially could be would want to use this. They're not on the cutting edge, right?
Watching this stuff.
This is pre-release software. It's not even released yet. So,
yeah. The people that watch the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up are the people that write "This should die in a fire."
Yes.
So they're not the audience that's going to turn around and extol its virtues to, Scott Hanselman's dark matter developers, and they're never going to know. They don't know it exists. So.
And keep in mind, we've already talked about this a little bit. This is kind of like the third or fourth time they've kind of tried this.
Yeah.
So the fact that they keep trying to reinvent that wheel speaks for itself.
There would have to be a file new project Razor Pages template. There would have to be, to get people to go, what is that? immediately go up to the little smiley and click it and say, this should die in a fire, right? They might do that, but unless they do that, unless there is a file new project, Razor Pages.
Yep. The common
How will
thread
people know about it?
All
So-
.NET developers, including the Dark Matter developers, are project templates.
So according to this one blog
Right.
I'm reading,
Yes,
in
that's how
Visual
you evangelize.
Yeah.
Project
2017 Preview 2, there is something called Web Application Razor Pages
Well, there you go.
under ASP Core 2.0.
Let's go install it right now.
And
I'll
on that
go on the
note,
blog post. We can link to the blog post. It's
So I
definitely
think
a template.
there was more than anyone would have thought there was to say about Razor Pages. Boy, we said
So
something. We said something about it.
let me put you on the spot. I keep going on about maintainability. I'm going to put you on the spot, both of you on the spot. Are Razor Pages inherently maintainable, unmaintainable, or depends?
I would say they're a very, very slippery soap. That is, because it's a slippery soap, most people are going to fall into making mistakes with them.
Yeah, I don't think I want to go over a 5-page site, maybe even 4.
I think that's
So- I wouldn't expect to see it at work. That's the thing, right?
so that's interesting. You just gauged complexity by the number of pages in a site.
Well,
See, I
it's a
would-
page-based framework, right? It's home,
Yeah.
about,
yeah.
contact, and then meet page. Whatever I'm really doing here. Maybe it's cataloging my movies or something. This is what I'm really doing. Or it's
Yeah.
my blog. So
Again,
home, about, contact, blog.
Yeah, but again, that's a content site. To me, content sites, right? If it's Embraco or Orchard, this model seems like it fits much better.
Content
And they
meaning read only, not
Well, I mean, you have some. I mean,
right.
e-commerce can even fit into things that you normally would use WordPress for, right? Your very much 95% of the internet, right? Your local sports team's website, the news website, things where people are creating content and uploading the content, but the majority of people consuming it is just reading it. So it's like 80-20, 80% reading it.
Sure. All right.
Yeah,
We got anything else?
Stuff fits into it, so it gets back to the point. This is about the PHP developer. Can they get that 1% of the PHP group to use ASP.NET Core? That to me is the audience. Period.
All right. Anything else? You guys got anything? Anything else we left out?
Well, let's see it evolve a little bit when they get a little more documentation.
But it's so simple. They don't need
I
more
mean, there's only a
documentation.
couple pages, right? And that page,
That's the point.
by the end of
They
that
shouldn't
page, you're
go
using
over
Entity
5.
Framework. By the end of the page, you're using async await and Entity Framework, and you're returning tasks. I mean, it goes from level 100.NET to 300 in a couple of wheel scrolls, right?
Yeah, they're doing things that most .NET developers aren't doing in MVC yet.
They don't even. Yeah, they're like, what's this async stuff for? What does it do?
Entity framework? We're just still using ADO.
All right.
Yeah.
I think on that.
On that.
Before we reach the end.
And you listener, what do you think about this Razor Pages approach? At least, our completely biased view that we presented in this podcast. We'd love to know. Please leave a comment on the website, staticvoidpodcast.com, or send an email to comments@staticvoidpodcast.com. And as always, if you have a topic you'd like us to discuss, oh my gosh. And as always, if you have a topic you'd like us to discuss on the show, please feel free to let us know through those same channels.
Or correct
Chris,
us.
yeah, right. Or
Yes.
just tell us.
Please
we're
correct
completely
us.
wrong.
Let's-
Please. I want to be wrong.
I
about
do
Razor
too.
Pages. Let me put that up. there.
I've been pleading for the last half hour how wrong I want to be and how much I want. I want an introductory gateway drug for .NET that people I can make web pages so easily. .NET is the way to go.
Please leave a comment on the website. Tell us why we're wrong. Challenge everything that we say, and that would be amazing. And then we'd love to bring you on the show, and you can talk.
Yes,
about
you can,
That's
you
not
can
a
make the
threat.
counter argument.
Yes. All right.
Yes, ooh, yes,
Chris,
the coin.
Todd, thanks
Yes.
for the chat.
See ya.
Yep, it's good.
And thank you, listener, for spending the time with us. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the Static Void Podcast. This 1:15 is like our new sweet
it's kind of
spot. It's very interesting.
So real quick before I forget. So the whole let's bring a young kid on. This is where Sam would work quite well.
Yeah.
He is that audience.
Yeah.
He is that. He was a year ago.
And then I've got like this guy here, this guy here. These are all student partners. I got their cards.
No, I was thinking that same thing, Chris. When you're saying we are not the guys to talk about this, we've been doing it for 20 years, right? Like, who I think that's kind of the point of this show is real world development. But you have a crucial point. Like, that's the lost voice. I mean, this is like, I don't want to get political. This is like going into, taking into the development community, the Trump versus Hillary, right? These are like all the lost voices that are out there, and we're here dominating the conversation, and they're not being heard, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's okay when you talk about like, look, lessons learned. For example, we have all learned the value of not filling our controllers up with business logic and in separating that out so it can be unit tested or even used in another application. Like, we have that experience. But my question has been is, okay, I know how I got into .NET, and you probably all have stories about how you got into .NET and why Microsoft. But what I want to know is, why is this guy who's a Microsoft student partner at Georgia Institute, at Georgia Tech, why did he pick Microsoft? How did it? I thought it wasn't cool, right? I thought, isn't everybody going to college right now using purely open source on their, and in fact, they've even paved their boxes with Linux. Like, isn't that what's going on? Or they just use Macs, right? This guy too, and this guy too, except these guys aren't. And I just wonder, I just want to figure out why. And so, like you said, you have someone too, Todd. Like, why?
Yeah. And he is 100% web. And we have debates all the time. He's very much into the React world. And you know how he gets all this information? Twitter. Some guy he follows on Twitter says X. So, that's cool.
So he goes and reads it. Yeah, he goes and reads it, sure.
Here's where I'm going to get myself in trouble.
You know we're still live.
Is it?
On Google.
I know. I'm fine with this. I'm not going to put it on the recording, on the podcast, but I will say it on the YouTube channel that 12 people watch. Who... Maybe it is the younger folks just haven't learned these lessons, and it's the experience that we have. And I'm getting myself in trouble because I sound incredibly arrogant to say that, but like, isn't that a legitimate argument? No, I totally sound arrogant.
Because when I was a young kid and I made all the mistakes, and a lot of times sometimes I was lucky to have people in the org who would be like, whoa.
Yeah, dude, calm down. You don't know.
And then,
like I've seen.
And then there were, right. And then there were other times that I didn't have that good fortune, and calamity ensued. I
still have the project that I bring up all the time, right? One of my first big projects was I worked on a BizTalk application, right? And this I got to the end. It was crunch time. It was 3 weeks into what should have been like a 3-day project, and I'm at the end of this like pipeline and multiple steps, and I'm like tweaking little bits here and there just to tweak it and try and get it working. And every single time I wanted to run it, it took 5 minutes just to start up the BizTalk pipeline and just to get in to even try and execute my code. And then my code took another 10, 20, 30 seconds or whatever, right? If someone were there and just said, hey, dude, why don't you like unit test that class? I would have been done in 2 days versus almost 2 months,
You don't need the whole,
like
right. The little advice like that. I agree with you.
I literally did not even know about unit testing at that point.
It wouldn't have occurred to you that you didn't need the whole enchilada to test this one thing.
Yeah.
I gotcha. And I think there's something to that. And I want to know. And look, if you watch this bit of the community stand up where I'm telling you, Damian Edwards blurts out, I love Razor Pages. And then they say, well, let's talk about the pitch for Razor Pages. And after about 5 minutes, Scott jumps in and says, I don't really feel like we gave an elevator-y pitch. Like, we've run out of time.
Yeah.
So there's a struggle right now to pitch Razor Pages because you know what all of us say? Well, I already have MVC. What's the problem?
Well, this is the classic Microsoft thing, right? Give me 17 different ways to do it and don't give me guidance on any of them. You can pick. They're all different options. So real quick about the younger audience thing. I think these are different conversations, right?
Yeah.
One is about how do you gravitate towards a stack? That's an entirely different kind of conversation than
Sure.
lessons learned and experiences and things.
Sure.
Then there's also the idea of, and one of the things I want to talk about with Sam is the idea of how are you learning things, right? Like when I went to school back in the 90s, what was cool? C. You learn C, and you're like, I want to go get a job running C code and all this stuff. Today, that's JavaScript. People learn JavaScript and they're like, I want to get a job doing JavaScript. That's how they gravitate towards the web. But you want to know why people use Microsoft? Because they get a job and they're told you're going to use the Microsoft stack on the server.
There's job recs that have .NET in them.
Yeah.
Like I was telling you guys the other day, I'm absolutely shocked to see job recs for junior developers with less than 3 years experience. Full stack Node, but please .NET as well. I'm just like, how does that person even exist? Yeah. One or the other I'll buy, not both.
And if they do have both, they have very limited experience in both.
Yeah, almost as to be kind of not too worthwhile.
Yeah, couple weeks.
Sure. Like if we're really truly saying I'll take a junior who knows some Node, well then I've already taken it upon myself that we're probably going to teach them the .NET side.
Right.
Yeah. We have no choice. We're going to teach this person the .NET side of it because there's no unicorn that knows all of it.
I mean, again,
not at 3 years.
In all of the 25 years I've done this, the only people who were new people who had .NET experience is because they were interns at that company when they were still going to school. Every other brand new people,
and they had to learn it.
They knew web.
Well, the guy at that we worked with at Technicos, who I honestly believe, I thought he became very, 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 very good at WPF. Why did he pick it up?
Cool. I think because someone who's smart can pick up the language.
Yeah, he's a smart guy, but there was a job that demanded high quality, high performance WPF, and I don't mean the WPF of I'm basically building web WinForms, but I'm doing it with XAML. It was what they said it would be for. Graphics, animations, push a button and the button expands, all the fancy stuff they wanted WPF to be. He could do it. He could do it. Young guy.
He wrote 20 of the 1,000 applications in the world that are actually like taking advantage of the full framework.
I worked on probably the other 4.
Yeah, sure.
I certainly worked on the probably 2 of the biggest Silverlight ones. One actually for you guys. What company? Crazy application.
For what?
For one particular company you used to work for. Very crazy application. Probably the most ridiculous application I've ever seen. It just was over the top for Silverlight. It's like, why are you using Silverlight and why the hell are we trying to build this application? Very, very overcomplicated. So
going back to the senior people have more experience. That experience when it comes like bringing it full circle to Razor pages, and my biggest, if I didn't make it clear, my biggest issue with this is I'm very skeptical about the maintainability and how it encourages you to do the wrong thing. And the reason that I am my assertion is that the reason I'm far more skeptical and focused on that particular point more than anything else is because that particular point is what has burned me so much in my career. And folks without that experience they're not thinking about it because it hasn't burned them yet.
Well, if they're picking PHP as their language of choice, then they haven't learned it yet.
Yeah.
Use WordPress, you haven't learned it yet. You don't know your site's hackable in 5 seconds. It's funny, every time I come to a website that's WordPress, I'm like, ooh, don't know if I want to use this website.
So we could maybe have on Mr. PowerShell to talk about why .NET devs should learn PowerShell.
That would be cool. Who is Mr. PowerShell?
Mike Robbins. I think his website is Mr. PowerShell. It might be .NET or .com. I don't know.
Cool. To talk about what?
I don't know. What would we talk about with a PowerShell MVP? Probably
cross-platform PowerShell.
Sure. Or like what developers should know about PowerShell. Should you learn it?
How
What
do you
have you
learn it?
been-
What's a good way to learn it? Like what is the beyond
Yeah.
Hello World? I can rate PowerShell.
Yeah, right. And then, like I said, there's these student partners we could reach out to. I
All
don't know.
right. Well, I think we can probably stop the broadcast.
Yes, we
Yeah.
definitely should
It's
probably.
gotten late. 12:43. Look, we even dropped our viewer.
That was
Yeah,
me.
I
Though.
had to go to
Yeah.
bed. Oh. All right. Well, good night, internet.
Turn off of the live stream.